Keanu Reeves visited a local charity orphanage. Everything seemed picture perfect on the surface. But just as he was about to leave, something caught his eye, something he couldn't ignore. And in that moment, he knew he had to act. The sun had long since dipped behind the Hollywood hills by the time Keanu finally made it home. His day had been a blur: meetings, script readings, and a charity dinner that stretched on way longer than expected. As he reached his front door, fumbling with his keys, exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders. Stepping inside, he dropped the keys onto the console table with a soft clatter that echoed in the quiet house. His eyes landed on a stack of unopened mail, a week's worth, judging by the pile. With a tired sigh, he scooped it up and wandered into the kitchen. Reaching for a whiskey bottle, he poured himself a generous glass, the amber liquid catching the warm glow of the room's soft lighting. He held the glass for a moment, watching the light flicker across its surface, then took a slow sip, letting the smoky richness linger on his tongue. As he turned his attention to the mail, he sifted through the usual bills, business letters, promotional flyers. A few fan letters stood out, covered in colorful stickers and handwritten notes, tiny bursts of warmth in an otherwise routine pile. The rhythmic sorting was oddly calming, a quiet break from the chaos of his daily life. Then, something caught his eye. Near the bottom of the pile sat a plain, unmarked envelope. No logos, no fancy cardstock, just simple, unassuming paper. Something about it felt different. Setting his glass down, Keanu picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands before carefully opening it. Inside was an invitation from Haven Hills Children's Home, a small orphanage hosting a charity event. He was invited as a special guest. A pang of guilt hit him. The invitation had been sitting there, unnoticed, for days. Leaning back in his chair, he held it for a moment, considering his schedule for tomorrow. He made a mental note to call his manager in the morning. But just as he set the invitation aside, another letter caught his attention. The envelope was simple, the handwriting neat but hesitant, like each word had been carefully thought out before being put to paper. Keanu opened it and began to read. Dear Mr. Reeves, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Merida Lafayette, and I grew up in the foster care system. I'm writing to tell you how much your work has meant to me over the years. Growing up without a permanent family was incredibly difficult. There were times when I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone. But your movies, the characters you played, they gave me hope. They showed me that even in the darkest times, kindness and strength still exist. Lately, something has been weighing on my mind. Over the past 10 years, it feels like orphanages and foster kids have become even more invisible. The news is full of political drama and celebrity gossip, but kids like me, we're forgotten. It's like we don't exist to the rest of the world. I know you're probably very busy, but I just wanted you to know that your work makes a difference. It reaches people like me, even when the rest of the world doesn't seem to care. Thank you for everything. Sincerely, Merida ****. Keanu sat still, the letter resting in his hands. Merida's words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. His eyes drifted back to the invitation from Haven Hills Children's Home. He pulled out his phone and started looking it up. It was a small facility tucked away in Orange County, about an hour and a half from his home. The website was basic, just a few photos of a modest building and a handful of smiling kids. It was clear they were working on a tight budget. Scrolling through the site, Keanu found himself thinking about Merida's letter. About the kids at Haven Hills. About how easily people like them slip through the cracks. His schedule was packed for tomorrow. But something in his gut told him this event mattered. That maybe, just maybe, his presence could make a difference. As he made his way to bed, the thought lingered in his mind. He'd check with his manager in the morning. Maybe he could find a way to fit it in. Because some things just shouldn't be ignored. Keanu Reeves' phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, pulling him from the last remnants of sleep. Notifications, messages, his schedule demanding attention before he'd even set foot out of bed. With a groan, he reached for the device. His manager, Patrick, had already sent over the day's itinerary. It was packed from morning till night: a breakfast meeting with a potential director, a costume fitting for his next film, a lunch interview with a major magazine, and an evening script reading for an upcoming project. As Keanu scrolled through the messages, one thing made him pause: the charity event invitation he had found the night before. A flicker of guilt hit him. It would be so easy to let it slip through the cracks, drowned out by the constant whirlwind of obligations that came with his life. But something about it stuck with him. Determined to at least consider it, he dialed Patrick's number while moving through his morning routine. "Morning, Keanu," Patrick answered, his tone crisp and professional, as always. "I trust you've seen today's schedule?" "Morning, Patrick." "Yeah, I've seen it," Keanu replied, his voice still rough from sleep. "Listen, did we get an invitation from Haven Hills Children's Home for a charity event today?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Yeah, we did. Meant to mention it earlier, but with everything else going on, to be honest, I didn't think it was worth bringing up. It's a really small event, Keanu. Barely any media coverage, just a handful of local reporters. Not exactly the best use of your time, especially with how packed your day is." Keanu frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, you knew about this? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Patrick's tone shifted slightly, turning defensive. "I did bring it up. A few times over the past month, actually. But you were always swamped, and you never confirmed if you wanted to go. So, I assumed you weren't interested." Keanu ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping in. Maybe Patrick was right, maybe he had overlooked it in the chaos of his schedule. But something about this felt different. "I see," he said, keeping his voice even. "Well, I'm considering it now. Do you think we could rearrange some things to make it work?" Patrick sighed again, the sound laced with quiet exasperation. "Keanu, I really don't think it's a good idea. This is a tiny orphanage, way out in Orange County. The event won't make a dent in the news cycle. Your time would be much better spent focusing on your current commitments." Keanu hesitated. On one hand, Patrick's logic was solid: career-wise, this wouldn't move the needle. But on the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that this event meant something. That it mattered. "I get where you're coming from," he said slowly. "But the fact that they reached out through multiple channels, management, mail, it shows how much this means to them. Doesn't that count for something?" Patrick's voice softened slightly. "Look, I know your heart's in the right place. But you can't say yes to every small charity event. If you really want to help, we can arrange a private visit another time. But today, you need to stick to the schedule." Keanu exhaled, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down. Patrick wasn't wrong. His schedule was already overloaded, and he had obligations he couldn't ignore. "All right," he said finally, though the words felt heavy. "We'll stick to the schedule." After ending the call, he lingered for a moment, staring at his phone as if the conversation hadn't fully settled in his mind. With a deep breath, he set it down and moved to finish getting ready. He pulled on his jacket with slow, deliberate movements, the quiet of his house amplifying his thoughts. Keys in hand, he hesitated briefly before stepping out the door. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city waking up. He walked toward his usual breakfast cafe, the familiar routine grounding him. But despite the peaceful surroundings, his mind wouldn't settle. The orphanage event lingered at the edges of his thoughts, gnawing at him like an unfinished sentence. Had he made the right choice? He told himself he was doing the responsible thing. That at least he was trying, he hadn't ignored the invitation completely. But deep down, the guilt still simmered. When he reached the cafe, the warm scent of coffee and fresh pastries wrapped around him. The cozy space buzzed with quiet energy, clinking dishes, hushed conversations. He slid into his usual seat by the window, ordering without thinking, the familiarity of the routine soothing in its own way. But even as he sat there, his gaze drifting outside, his mind wasn't really in the moment. It was still with Haven Hills. still turning over the words of Merida's letter. A quiet murmur from a nearby table pulled him from his thoughts. Two women sat just a few feet away, deep in conversation. One of them, her voice tinged with frustration, said something that caught his attention. "It's gotten so much harder in the past decade." Keanu's ears perked up. He wasn't sure why, but something told him he needed to listen. "All the news ever talks about is political drama and celebrity gossip," one of the women sighed, frustration lacing her words. "Kids in orphanages, the elderly in care homes, they're just forgotten." She gestured emphatically, her passion evident. Her companion nodded, her expression serious. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like they've become invisible. No one pays attention unless there's some scandal or tragedy to exploit. If only we had someone who could actually bring attention to the cause, someone people would listen to." Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, their words landing heavier than he expected. He took another sip of his coffee, slower this time, his mind weighing the conversation. That lingering guilt from earlier deepened, now joined by something else, a sense of urgency. For the first time that morning, his focus sharpened. Not just on the event at Haven Hills, but on what it could mean if he approached it with real intent. He glanced over at the two women as their conversation continued. Was this the universe nudging him? A subtle push in the direction he was supposed to go? And then, as if fate was twisting the knife a little deeper, he heard something that made him freeze. "Speaking of which," the first woman said, "did you hear about that event at Haven Hills Children's Home today?" "Oh yeah," the other woman replied, shaking her head dismissively. "Decided not to go, though. It's so far out, and honestly, the impact would be minimal. Barely any media coverage. They should have tried harder." Their words hit Keanu like a physical blow. Even people dedicated to charity work, people who cared, were brushing off Haven Hills as too small to matter. He thought about the kids waiting there. Excited. Expecting a special guest. Expecting him. His chest tightened. Without hesitation, Keanu stood, collected his order, and stepped out of the cafe. But this time, he wasn't just leaving, he was making a decision. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Patrick's number. "Patrick, I need you to clear my morning schedule," he said firmly, cutting off his manager's protests before they even started. "I'm going to Haven Hills." "Keanu, we talked about this." "I know we did," he interrupted, his voice steady. "But this feels important. Sometimes, showing up for the people who are overlooked is more important than any high-profile engagement." Patrick started to argue, but Keanu didn't wait for a response. He ended the call, slid his phone back into his pocket, and walked to his car. The decision was made. As he gripped the wheel, a determined glint in his eye, the weight of the city behind him, he knew this trip would change more than just his day. The sleek, modern lines of Hollywood's skyline gradually softened, dissolving into the slower rhythm of suburban sprawl as Keanu's car hummed steadily southward through Orange County. The towering buildings and neon-lit streets gave way to quiet neighborhoods lined with tidy houses, each with its own manicured lawn and carefully trimmed hedge. With each passing mile, the scenery shifted. The pristine uniformity of the suburbs began to fade. The GPS guided him onto quieter, less maintained roads. Sidewalks disappeared, replaced by narrow shoulders flanked by uneven ditches and clusters of scraggly trees. The further he drove, the more rugged the landscape became. The neat perfection of city planning faded into something wilder, something forgotten. Much like the place he was heading to. After nearly 2 hours on the road, he finally spotted it. A small, weathered sign at the edge of a dirt driveway. Haven Hills Children's Home. The letters, once a cheerful blue, had faded over time, accompanied by a hand-drawn image of a sun partially obscured by clouds. The sign tilted slightly, as if the earth beneath it had grown tired of holding it up. Keanu turned onto the gravel driveway, the soft crunch of stones beneath his tires the only sound in the quiet morning. The parking lot was small and unpaved, barely big enough for 5 cars, though only 2 spots were taken. As he eased into a space and shut off the engine, silence settled over him. Before him stood the children's home. It was a simple two-story structure, worn with age, making no attempt to hide the years it had endured. The front steps sagged slightly in the middle, smoothed by decades of small feet running up and down. An overgrown garden stretched along the side of the building, wildflowers blending with weeds, a lone wooden bench sitting crookedly among the greenery. The paint peeled in long, uneven strips, signs of a place where love was abundant, but resources were stretched thin. Keanu exhaled slowly, stepping out of the car and closing the door with deliberate gentleness, as if not wanting to disturb the quiet around him. This wasn't a grand venue. No red carpets. No flashing lights. No reporters waiting to capture a moment. It was just a home. Worn, but enduring. A place filled with children who deserved more than what they had been given. As he approached the entrance, he half expected the door to be locked. But when he reached for the handle, it swung open easily. Stepping inside, Keanu found himself face to face with a moment that would be more impactful than he could have ever imagined. But we do what we can with what we have, Victor added, flashing another tight smile. Keanu nodded, but his mind remained elsewhere. The contrast between the two rooms gnawed at him. The brightly lit space filled with happy, laughing children, and the dim, isolated playroom with the two girls, black, alone, and frightened. The difference was stark. Too stark to be a coincidence. As Victor continued his well-rehearsed speech about the orphanage's financial struggles, Keanu stole another glance toward the hallway they had just come from. The door to the dim playroom was still closed. Something wasn't right. Years in the film industry had sharpened his instincts. He could sense when someone was putting on an act. And Victor Langford? He was performing. You mentioned a flu outbreak, Keanu said, turning back to Victor. How many children are in quarantine? Victor hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second. Just those two. We caught it early, so we were able to isolate the symptoms before it spread. Keanu let the words sit in the air between them. They felt convenient. Too convenient. And your staff? He pressed. I noticed the reception desk was empty when I came in. Victor gave a practiced chuckle. Yes. Our receptionist had to step out for a bit. She wears many hats around here. Small staff, you know. Everyone pitches in where they can. Keanu forced a polite nod, but inside, his unease was growing. Mind if I see the rest of the facility? He asked. Of course. Right this way, Victor replied smoothly, leading him further into the orphanage. As they walked, Keanu kept his steps slow, his eyes scanning everything, the worn furniture, the peeling paint, the way the laughter from the main playroom barely reached the rest of the building. And the way Victor always made sure to keep moving. He was guiding Keanu, controlling the visit, keeping him away from certain areas. Something was being hidden here. And Keanu intended to find out what. Kindness that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, lifeless room around them. The girls exchanged a quick glance before one of them finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya. Keanu smiled gently. Nice to meet you, Maya. And you? The second girl hesitated, eyes flicking nervously to Victor before mumbling, Layla. Keanu noticed how both girls instinctively flinched whenever Victor moved, their small hands tightening around each other. His stomach twisted. Maya and Layla. Those are beautiful names, he said, keeping his voice warm, reassuring. But his mind was racing. The red marks on their skin, the way they seemed afraid to even speak, this wasn't just about a flu quarantine. Something was wrong. Victor, standing stiffly near the door, cleared his throat. As you can see, Mr. Reeves, the girls are in recovery. A bit shy, but they'll be just fine. Now, if we could. What happened to their arms? Keanu cut in, his gaze now locked on Victor. Victor let out a strained chuckle. Oh, just a skin reaction. The flu can be quite harsh on young immune systems, you know. Keanu didn't move. Didn't blink. Flu causes burns? Victor's face twitched ever so slightly, his practiced calm faltering for the first time. A fever rash, he amended quickly. Some children react this way. It's harmless, just looks worse than it is. Keanu's instincts were screaming now. He had spent years studying people, watching for the smallest tells in body language, the micro-expressions that betrayed a person's true thoughts. And Victor was lying. Behind him, the cameras were still rolling, the reporters capturing everything. Keanu turned back to the girls, his voice softer now. Maya, Layla, can I see your arms? I promise, it's okay. The girls hesitated. Then, slowly, Maya pulled her arm from behind her back. Keanu's breath caught. The skin wasn't just red, it was raw. Inflamed. Like it had been deliberately irritated. Not by a fever. Not by a rash. By something else. A glance at Layla's arms confirmed it. The same marks. The same pattern. Keanu's jaw clenched. His entire posture shifted, no longer just a visitor, but a protector standing between these children and whatever had hurt them. Victor's tone sharpened. Mr. Reeves, I think that's enough. We don't want to overwhelm the girls. Keanu rose to his full height, turning to face him. Overwhelm them? His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. Or expose something. The room had gone silent. The camera crews, the reporters, everyone was watching. Victor forced a laugh, but it was thin, brittle. Keanu, please. Let's step outside and discuss this. No, Keanu said, his voice steady. I think we'll stay right here. He turned to the nearest reporter. Keep rolling. Victor paled. You don't understand. I understand plenty. Keanu cut him off, his voice now carrying the weight of someone who had made up his mind. I understand that these girls are scared. I understand that this place isn't what it pretends to be. And I understand that this is far from over. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. I'm calling someone who actually gives a damn about these kids. Victor took a step back, his carefully crafted composure crumbling. Because in that moment, he knew. The world was about to start paying attention. And Keanu Reeves wasn't leaving without answers. Keanu knelt beside the twins, his voice soft and reassuring. I'm here to help. You don't have to be afraid. One of the girls finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm Amaya. This is my sister, Alana. Keanu smiled gently. It's nice to meet you both. How are you feeling? Before they could answer, Victor interjected quickly. They've had fevers, coughing, all typical flu symptoms. We're just keeping them isolated for safety. Keanu nodded, but something felt off. The girls showed no visible signs of illness, only red, irritated skin and fear in their eyes. Victor urged them to take a quick photo, his tone smooth and coaxing. They hesitated but eventually complied. Keanu posed with them, his practiced smile masking the unease building inside him. As he was about to ask them more, his phone vibrated. Patrick. Keanu, you're late. Are you still at that orphanage? Keanu sighed, glancing back at the twins. Their eyes met his, silent and pleading. Yes, but I'm leaving soon. Good. You have commitments. Ending the call, Keanu turned back to the room just in time to see Victor posing with the girls, gripping their arms too tightly. The way they tried to shrink away from his touch sent a chill down Keanu's spine. Seizing the moment, he crouched beside them again. Amaya, Alana, can I ask you something? A silent exchange passed between the sisters before Alana whispered, We're not supposed to talk. We're sick. Keanu's suspicions deepened. Are you really sick? The girls shook their heads. Before they could say more, Victor's voice boomed. That's enough excitement for today. The tension in the air was undeniable. Keanu stood, his gaze locked onto Victor's. Actually, I'd like to discuss improving this quarantine room. If children are sick, they should have proper care. Victor's smile tightened. Of course, your donation would help with that. Let's talk outside. The press had packed up, leaving only Keanu, Victor, and the twins. The moment felt heavier now, something wasn't right. Victor's polished demeanor was slipping, and Keanu could see it. As he left, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking away from something urgent. But then he realized he had forgotten to collect a copy of his donation check. A small oversight, but the perfect reason to return. On his way back to Haven Hills, a gut feeling told him he was racing against time. As he approached the orphanage, a loud crash from inside made his heart pound. Muffled cries. A raised voice. Without hesitation, Keanu pushed open the door. A staff member stepped in his way. "You can't be here, sir." Keanu's gaze hardened. "I heard something. I just want to make sure everyone's okay." Another voice, old and urgent, cut in. "Let him through." Merida Lafayette. The name clicked in Keanu's mind, the same one from the letter he had read the night before. "Go. Help the children," she whispered. Keanu didn't hesitate. He pushed past the man and ran toward the commotion. The kitchen. What he saw made his blood run cold. Victor stood over Amaya and Alana, his face contorted with rage. Around them, a group of children watched in terrified silence. "Why can't you behave for once?" Victor hissed. "Your kind always causes problems in my house." Keanu stepped forward. "What's going on here?" Victor spun around, caught off guard. His face flickered with panic before he forced a smile. "Mr. Reeves, I wasn't expecting you back." Keanu ignored him, turning to the twins. "Are you sick?" Both girls shook their heads. "Then why were they in quarantine, Victor?" Keanu's voice was dangerously calm. "And these marks on their skin, those aren't flu symptoms, are they?" Victor stammered. "Fever rash, different reactions." "And the slurs you just yelled at them? That part of the care you provide too?" The color drained from Victor's face. Keanu turned to the other children. "Has this happened before?" Silence. Then, a boy, no older than 6, murmured, "They're always kept in that room. Even when they're not sick." Another girl added, "We're not allowed to play with them. They have to stay separate." More voices joined in, each revealing the truth. The abuse. The discrimination. Victor snapped. "Shut up, you ungrateful little liars." Keanu's expression darkened. "That's enough, Victor." Victor's face twisted in rage. "You don't understand. Running this place isn't easy. Sacrifices have to be made." Keanu's voice was ice. "They're children. Not sacrifices." Pulling out his phone, he dialed 911. "This ends now." Victor's panic escalated. "You can't prove anything." Keanu's gaze never wavered. "I think they'll believe the children." Police sirens cut through the air. Victor lunged for a pot of boiling water, his last act of desperation. But before he could lift it, the police stormed in, restraining him. Keanu turned to the trembling children. "It's over now. He can't hurt you anymore." Outside, Amaya and Alana clung to him. "What happens to us now?" "You'll be placed in a safe home," a social worker assured them. "Will we be together?" Amaya whispered. "We'll do everything we can," the social worker promised. Keanu knelt beside them. "You're safe now. I promise we'll meet again soon." As the twins were driven away, Keanu felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. Then he saw her, Merida. "Your letter brought me here today," Keanu said, his voice full of gratitude. "Because of you, these children are safe." Merida's eyes glistened. "I wasn't sure if anyone would listen. I listened, Keanu assured her. And I want to do more. I want to rebuild Haven Hills. With new management, new staff, and real care for these kids. Will you help? Merida hesitated, then nodded. I'd be honored. As the sun set over the orphanage, Keanu made one final call. Michael, I need you to look into Haven Hills. Its ownership, its financials. I want to buy it. And fix it. A pause. Then Michael's voice, steady and determined. If you're serious, we'll make it happen. Keanu exhaled, gripping the wheel. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he knew this was just the beginning.